Hello, 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 and welcome to the Loudcast with me, your host, Kevin McLean. I am still here, still in my flat in Leith, and still bringing you some of the very best of spoken word. We have an excellent show for you today, guys. Our guest is none other than Jess Green, one of my big favourites. She was one of the first full live spoken word shows I ever saw performed way back in 2014. She's an excellent writer and performer, and it'll be wonderful to be able to pick her brains about her own work, about TV writing, about putting on a one-person show, all of that good stuff. And we will also be chatting to her about this week's new release video, which is from Carly Brown. I am not a poet, which is a tremendous piece from Carly. We will get to that, but we're going to kick off with two other videos this week. The first of which is from one of my all-time favourites, a good pal of mine, former flatmate, Freddie Alexander, who joined us for a Prague Fringe run along with the Loud Band. And this is White Liberals' Burden.
Take up the white liberals' burden. Send forth, ye brave of heart. Go out to serve the world and do the white liberals' part. To stand in solidarity with the oppressed and needy lot, ne'er a problematic phrase shall cross your liberal thoughts. Take up the white liberals' burden, those with first-class degrees in anthropology and literature, to serve the world's needs. Speak of paradigms and periarchy and post-modern theory. Your plain and simple speech is light to the weak and weary. Take up the white liberals' burden, not for those struck with fear. It takes a lot of confidence to do Teach First for less than a year and live in urban neighborhoods listening to rap, reggae, and ska and secretly congratulate yourself at how not racist you are. Take up the white liberals' burden, a life of toil and pain, as you criticize austerity from your yoga retreat in Spain. Read in gentrified coffee bars and activist open mics. Give us a 2.5-minute slam poem and a Facebook page to like. Take up the white liberals' burden as long a time you live. You're not at all a narcissist, you just have so much to give. Take up the white liberals' burden. Its yoke is light and its burden is also light. Your morals are progressive and your politics vaguely center-right.
Freddie Alexander there with White Liberals' Burden. Oh, what a piece. Freddie, the king of takedown poetry. Yes, it's a very good piece. A spectacular performance of it, like I said, out in Prague. Even the Easter egg of some invisible piano from the one and only Mr. Sam Thorne. Good job all round. But we keep rolling. This week we are taking you back to our very first performance at the Scottish Storytelling Centre as part of our monthly event series that we kicked off there in 2018. One of the first poets we got over, it was a huge get for me, someone I desperately wanted to bring in, and we finally had a bit of a budget to do so. It was Go Hart, who we brought over from Dublin, Ireland. A tremendous poet, a tremendous writer. He is someone with a huge amount of gravitas and a sort of magnetic performance style. I know you're going to love him. Check out Go Hart with Metal.
Would you rather be metal, strong, firm, and unbreakable? Or would you rather be cushion, soft, with feathers on your inside, yet no flight, some comfort for sitting? I do not answer hastily, for of course he is old and wise and has seen enough things to demand my attention. He carries on before I could speak. They do not make men anymore. Not strong, not firm, all breakable. I stare in the face of the ghosts that haunt me, with virgin eyes that know no tears, yet still too soft to be man, a broken metal. Because metal bends too easy when the insides are empty, and morning creeps to night for the man of steel, but I man up still. I metal up. I gather my broken metal fragments the same way as all the boys I know. It makes our masks. We do not call it masculinity for nothing, but there is nothing wrong with being broken. As long as you do not leave the pieces behind when you are moving on, but it's hard to believe sometimes. So sometimes we cry in secret. Sometimes we write poems. Sometimes we punch things. Sometimes we break the people that love us and use the sharp edges to cut off our Achilles' heel to show we have no weakness. For this is the way of man. This is the way of metal. Be it knife or gun or boy, most things unbreakable break things too easy. I'm not searching this poem for answers. Most days I still wear my armor with pride. I write eulogies in poems for all the tears uncried and all the parts of me that died. One day, when he asks me metal or cushion, I'll show him the picture of a woman and hope he realizes some metals are soft and some cushions are goddamn unbreakable.
And that was Dagogo Heart there with Metal, a spectacular piece, spectacular performance, and a lovely dude. Do go and check out all of Dagogo's work. But we have one more video for you before we get our guest in to chat all things spoken word with, Jess Green. We have a video from LP OG Carly Brown. She was one of the first and still one of the best. This is Carly Brown, I'm Not a Poet.
I am not a poet. I know that this is true because when I Googled how to dress like a poet, before my first ever poetry reading, the WikiHow page that I found said, step 1, if you want to be a poet, get a black polo neck. Because apparently poets wear lots of dark fabric, so if you can best replicate a nebulous cloud of doom with your fashion, when you walk into the room, everyone will know that that is a poet. Step 2, line your eyes with dark makeup so you resemble a troubled raccoon. Like you've been looking up at the half moon, writing tear-stained haikus about it in your moleskin notebook. Step 3, generally try to be as melancholy as possible. Okay, so I'll get a beret and grow some subtle facial hair if I can. I read all of these and I thought, well, I look like a damn Christmas caroler all of the time. And there's no way that a beret is gonna hide that, so that settles it. I'm not a poet. I'm not a poet. Because I said this to somebody recently who asked me about all of those scary verbs, like, what do you wanna do? What do you wanna be? And I practically shouted at her, I'm not a poet. I don't even like poetry that much, okay? But I said it in the way that you deny being in love with somebody. I am not a poet because growing up, that meant hollowed faces in sepia and black and white, shadows that might lock themselves in Amherst or drink themselves into oblivion. And when people asked me what I wanted to be when I was a kid, I would lie and say politician. I am not a poet because I really like eating. And that requires money. And I am so terrified that I will be burning my manuscripts for warmth in 3 years' time, roasting marshmallows while the pages close in on themselves. I am not a poet just because when I read Emily Dickinson, my whole body feels lightly electrified. And I love the sight of ink drying. And I was once so happy to be in the house of the Italian poet Leopardi that I literally passed out. I remember people shouting as I looked at his lines scratched out in brown parchment like veins. I'm not a poet just because when it rains, I think about Don Patterson's poem about drops braiding the window panes, and I am less lonely. I'm not a poet because there are so many things that matter more to me than people making holes with their letters through which you can peer into other selves. Just because I've got shelves and shelves of anthologies, there are so many things that matter more to me than poetry. I can't think of any of them right now, but I'll get back to you. Thank you.
And that was Carly Brown with I'm Not a Poet. A tremendous performance from a tremendous poet. She's a liar, but a really good poet. Carly Brown is one of the LPOGs. She goes way back to her first gig in 2014. She is someone that is went with us the whole way. We love Carly dearly. Check out all of her stuff. There will be links below in the description. But to chat about Carly's amazing poem and all her own awesome poetry and amazing writing and wonderful events that she runs and all that good jazz, it is one of my favourite people in the scene. Please welcome to the Loudcast, Jess Green. How's it going, Jess?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Oh, good. You're like normally this is a very bad podcast because it just opens with me asking people how they've been during lockdown, and so we immediately set a really negative tone from the outset, which is. But you came in with a lot of positivity. Are you staying sane during lockdown?
You know what? I feel like first lockdown was also, I'm not going to use the word unprecedented, but it was also new and strange and odd and took a lot of getting used to. And then second lockdown, I've like fully got into the swing of just like, my life is really small. I get up, I walk my dog, I do some writing, and I watch television. And I'm kind of like fine with that for the moment. I mean, I don't want to live the rest of my life like that, but you know, for a few months, just walking my dog and doing a bit of writing and watching telly, I'm quite happy just pootling along like that. So I'm doing all right at the moment.
Good, good. Although it does show the state of affairs that you're having to differentiate between lockdowns at this point. You're in Leicester, right? So what, you're on lockdown like 5 at this stage.
Yeah. So like, yeah, so in Leicester, we never came out of lockdown. We had the first lockdown with everyone else, and then everyone else came out of lockdown, and we still had a load of rules. And then the whole tier system came in, and people just no one talked about Leicester. It was like they'd forgotten about Leicester. We didn't even know what tier we were in for quite a while, and then we went back into lockdown again. So yeah, we've never experienced freedom over the past 9 months or so.
It's brutal. It's really insane. But this is a lovely escape. Like, I've not got. We normally see each other during the Fringe, and this Loudcast has become a bit of an excuse for me to chat to people that I normally get to see once a year and haven't. So it's nice to have you on for a bit of a chat about some awesome spoken word. Have you met Carly Brown? Do you know Carly?
I have met Carly.
Good,
Carly
good.
came to do my night in Leicester, Find the Right Words, about 3 years ago, I think. And then I think I've also met her at the Fringe. And then she was also meant to do Find the Right Words virtually this year. But we had a slight change of plans. But yes, I have met Carly. I think she's wonderful. She's such a wonderful poet and person.
Nice. It's always that weird thing of like when you've known two people so very long and you consider them always to have known each other, but there were weird ones that comes up where people haven't been introduced, and it always freaks me out. But yeah, Carly's been around forever. I'm glad you got her down for Find the Right Words and stuff. And like, just, I know we're about to talk about Carly's poem and all that, but I wanted to say on Find the Right Words, like, I think it's one of the things I've talked a lot about on this cast and like in general in the scene is how a lot of English promoters seem to forget that there is a crop of very talented Scottish poets, and I think one of the things you always did really well with Find the Right Words was bringing down Scottish folk, which is very cool. Like, I know like Carly went down, I went down, I'm pretty sure you had Iona Lee in, right, and like a bunch of other Scottish folk.
Yeah, you know, it is madness to ignore you all up there because, like you say, there were a whole bunch of incredibly talented poets. And yeah, it was funny actually. Yeah, when you came down to do Find the Right Words, and Carly, you both said like, we never get gigs in England, and I was like, you know, yeah. So it was great to have you along in Leicester.
Yeah, it's one of those strange things. Like, I've gigged in England a lot, but they're usually gigs that I have put on, like little bits of tours or whatever, or fringies, or like corporate gigs. You are still the only person that's ever booked me for like a poetry night in England to come down
That is
specifically
madness.
and be there, which is, I like to think so.
It's madness as well because we all the English poets come up to the Edinburgh Fringe, so, and we meet you all there, and you know, so we know you exist. So
Yeah, the
I think
knowledge is
that's
there.
real madness.
It's a thing that I found specifically surprising during like the virtual stage of it, where you're going, there is literally no boundary geographically. Like, if you're putting on a virtual gig, you can book anyone from anywhere, but yeah, there's still a lot of very London centric, or you know, like wherever that night is, they're still putting on the same folk. I wonder if it's just because people, you know, maybe the people promoting aren't seeing as much range and stuff. But yeah, I like that
maybe.
you always made the effort.
Well, we need to break down those barriers, don't we?
I go on and on about it. It's weird that we only, like, there is this kind of thing of, there is the Fringe where the English and Scottish scene mingle, and then they are just separate the rest of the time. Yeah, but you did with Carly. It was good to see you having her down there. And Carly has long been one of my favorite poets. I think it was a weird thing because I had Stuart Kenny on last episode of the Loudcast, and one of the things he brought up was maybe a lack of, as he sort of kind of like, joyful poetry, where there is a lot of the poetry, especially in the spoken word scene, is very like political or you know, like confessional, or that kind of mix, where it's a sort of heavier subject matter. And he was saying there's sometimes a lack of the joy. Whereas I look at like someone like Carly and go, even when she is talking about serious subjects or something like that, she manages to weave humor and joy into her performance. I don't know if like how you feel about like, do you think there's a lack of happy or upbeat poetry?
It's funny, isn't it? I think like the art to a really perfect 20-minute set is thinking about the light and shade and the highs and lows, and making sure that you're not just doing like 4 very serious, sad poems, because we've definitely got space for serious and sad poems, but you know, there is no greater way to bring an audience down or cause them to have a lapse in concentration than just to be very, I think, samey and negative for 20 minutes. And I think Carly is such a brilliant example of, she's such a wonderful contrast. In that poem, I think, does she describe herself as looking like a carol singer all year round? And she's so kind of aware of like her own, the way she can be perceived and the way that she looks. And she uses that to create contrast in her work, and her work is full of contrast as well. So like you say, she can be talking about something very serious, and actually, you know, there's nothing that I dislike more in a poem often than when people talk about like the writing process or like being a poet in their poetry, because I just think it's so self-absorbed. But Carly just does it brilliantly, and it's funny, and she is talking about stuff that in the wrong hands could be very self-indulgent, you know, the things about kind of Emily Dickinson and having shelves and shelves of poetry anthologies, but it's contrasted with such lightness and humour that she completely gets away with it. And I think one of the things I really like about Carly is her lightness of touch. So she makes it all look very easy, and I think that's such a mark of a good performance poet, is that they make it look effortless, and underneath there is so much work and craft that's gone into that piece of writing and that performance.
100%. There's an interesting like crop of ostensibly North American poets who are all very much UK poets. Like we have Carly and Katie up here, and there's like Rose Condo down in Manchester and stuff, who are all, you know, they're North American, but their style is grown here. They've all like learned to perform here. And I think you get this really interesting, like it's like you're saying the duality in Carly, right, where you have, she disarms the audience and gets them on board for when she does those very sincere moments about like her very, you know, nice love of poetry, something she's very passionate about, but she knows how to wrap it in that kind of British humor of like self-deprecation and, you know, being the butt of your own joke a bit, which I think you see in it, where, you know, she sets up all the like Googling how to look like a poet and things like that. She lets you laugh at her and see that she understands the silliness, so that when she underpins something like, you know, and goes, no, I really care about this bit, you're willing to go a bit more with it because you've seen them not take everything so seriously.
Totally. Like, she has nailed British humour. And I think, you know, it's one of those things when I'm doing workshops or like mentoring sessions, I always talk about the best way to make an audience feel comfortable and to make yourself feel comfortable on stage very quickly is to make them laugh. Because once you've made them laugh, they'll trust you and they'll go with you more. Everybody relaxes when they've laughed a bit more, and if you could, you know, there's a skill to making people laugh. So if you can make them laugh, then they trust that you know what you're doing, and they'll let you get away with being a bit sincere or a bit earnest. And I think Carly's really nailed that.
Absolutely. And like you said, like people forget about Carly, I think, because when, you know, she's doing spoken word shows and the pieces that people choose to put out of her as videos, especially like us, are like her more manic poems that are very performance based. But like Carly is, you know, a PhD. Like she's a very talented writer. Yeah, she knows how to do like her, you know, more serious stuff. She has a beautiful, you know, a couple beautiful books out and things like that. So you're like, she knows how to do it. She knows how to aim at the audience that she has in front of her. You know, whether that's someone reading their book or there to see her do a spoken word piece. And I'm a huge fan of Carly and what she does. I think you're bang on the joke thing as well. It's a thing I always try and do, like when you're talking about constructing a set. And I super agree with you that you want to have, you know, shadow and light in every set that you have. But like the joke, I will often try and, you know, really pay attention to the set before me, so I can reference something that they've said, make a joke out of, you know, like make it a running gag, because then you put yourself in the position of the audience as well. You're like, oh, I was listening and watching and enjoying with you. I have paid attention. It's just like you can set yourself up for more success, like in a set, than if you do some very simple things at the start.
No, absolutely. And I think it's like anything. I mean, one of my biggest defense mechanisms in, like, when I have to go to meetings or job interviews or, you know, horrible networking events, you know, anything that I feel nervous about, is that I try and make somebody like smile or laugh as quickly as possible, because people like smiley, funny people, and kind of once you've done that, you can just relax a little bit. And yeah, I think it's a real tool, I think, for making people comfortable.
Nice. As well with Carly, like, obviously she's a former Scottish Slam champion. Just like, I say obviously because you look at Carly, she's made to win slams, right, with the kind of style that she has. But you yourself have a bit of a slam history, Jess, right? You were BBC Ed Fringe Slam champ, right?
I was, in 2018.
How did that go? How did you find the BBC Fringe Slam?
Gosh, that was really funny, because I had done, when I first started out in poetry in like 2011, 2012, I thought kind of like slams was the only way to have any success, and I did loads and loads and loads of slams and never had any success, and always was like chucked out in the first round. And then I kind of lost my confidence with them and didn't do one for years. And then 2018 was the year that I took my Corbin show to Edinburgh, and I'd worked so hard at that show. I kind of, you know, I've toured 2 poetry shows, and I think that one I just put so much work into. I spent like a year working on it before I went to Edinburgh. I did 3 previews of it in the Midlands, and then I obviously went to Edinburgh and performed it every day for 2 weeks, and every day finishing the show and thinking about what I could do better and how could it be improved. And I think the show and my performance just got better and better, and I really grew in confidence. So by the time I got to kind of the final of the BBC Slam, I think for myself I was really kind of at the top of my game, because I've been just doing it every day and really working on my craft. And it's just funny how, you know, it really shows that kind of practice makes perfect. Like I'd practiced it so many times, and I practiced those pieces that eventually won me the slam so many times, that by the time I got on stage at the final, I felt really confident about it. And I remember kind of performing and sort of seeing the audience's reaction and thinking, God, I don't think I could have done this 6 months ago. It was a very surreal experience.
There's that nice, sort of strange experience when you are aware of your own performance as it is happening and how badly or poorly it's going. It's usually one of the extremes. If you're aware in the moment of how it's going, it's because it's on one of the polar ends, which is. Yeah. But I think there's a huge thing to what you're saying about like repetition, and like literally you will find yourself at peaks when you are doing it every day. Like I love the Fringe, because I feel like what I thought it was going to be like to be a full-time artist when I was a kid. I feel like that is the only thing I have to think about, is being on that stage every night, and like, you know, the how many bums are in the seats, and like it's just a very focused lens with which to view your artistic outlet. There's no emails at that point, there's no taxis to fill out, there's none of the nonsense, the other bits that go into it. It's just get the shows done. And like I love that. And so I think by the end of Fringe, I'm always at my best. Like the last few performances are always like banging. And I worry sometimes with the spoken word scene that, given the lack of like touring network and consistent shows, that we don't get the same thing a comedian does, where they're, you know, doing 3 gigs a week and sharpening their skills. You know, you with spoken word, maybe slightly different down south, but like I feel there's big gaps, and especially if you're not putting on your own shows to like consistently get that quality up.
Yeah, no, it's true. And kind of one of the things that one of the things I talk about when I'm doing workshops is that I say, like, when I'm touring, and that could be like 2 or 3 shows a week, but equally it could be like one show every fortnight, but I practice every day, even if I know those poems like inside out, back to front, and I'm just so fucking bored of them. Like, I'm still practicing them every day. It's exactly the same as if you were like practicing an instrument. And I think the fringe is funny because everyone says this, doesn't it? It's such a cliche, but it can be so brutal. It is brutal. Even if you have the best time, it's brutal. And like that year when I won the slam and was doing the Corb show every day, it was wonderful. It was like the best fringe I've ever had. But that started with me losing my voice and getting really, really unwell and having to cancel like 2 shows. And I had my first round in the BBC Sam. I had my first heat, and like 2 days before I came to watch other people doing their first heat, and I couldn't speak to anyone because my voice had completely gone. And I remember thinking, God, there's no way I'm going to manage to do this. And miraculously it came back, and I had to really look after it to make sure I was going to end up being able to do my shows each day. But it was brutal, and it made me really, really ill. But I came out the other side of that fringe being the best performer that I had ever been in my career.
It's that thing you have to strengthen those tools. It's like it'd be like being a power lifter and not bothering between competitions to continue to lift weight, right? Like you have to stay honed, and it's that because you see it a lot in people. I've done it as well. Like when you're maybe doing more shows than you're used to, or it's a different kind of more intensive show or whatever, and voices go and things like that in a way that they wouldn't were you constantly or not constantly. That would be a terrible way to live. Imagine constant fringe. That would be insane. but more consistently, I guess, is what I mean. It's interesting to see. And what you say about practicing, it lives in my brain. Someone told me, this may be completely untrue, but do you know Robin Cairns, who runs Scottish National Slam? He apparently practices his entire repertoire of poetry every Sunday. Like he just runs through his whole back catalogue to a mirror. And I've never seen him drop a line in a performance. I've never seen him flub a line or forget a piece. Like
that
ever.
Is the thing, isn't it? It is like anything. You so often get people, asking you in real life or like messaging you on Twitter and being like, how do I get good at this? How do I get successful at this? Like there's some like magic answer, and the answer is always it's just practice. It's practicing all the skills. If you need to be writing all the time, reading all the time, watching stuff. You need to be, even practicing like networking, as much as I fucking hate that word. All of the things that make up a successful artist, you need to be practicing those skills all the time, and that is, the only way. There is no magic answer.
100% agree. It's that people always want the step to get past that, right? Like, how do I skip that level? And you're like, it's never going to happen. You just have to plug away. But how did you get started then in spoken word, Jess?
Well, talking of desperately wanting to find that magic answer, when I was in I went to John Moores in Liverpool and I studied creative writing. And while I was there, there was a real spoken word performance poetry scene in Liverpool. And at the time, it was I had never really discovered performance poetry before anyway, but looking back on it and comparing it to other spoken word scenes in other cities, it really was at that time like nothing I'd had experienced at that point or have experienced since. It was like you'd go into pubs, and in the back rooms of pubs there'd just be a load of old men kind of telling stories about working down on the docks. And like it wasn't cool, it wasn't young, it wasn't hip, it really was just like old men telling stories. And I think kind of a load of students started, I don't know how much they thanked us, but a load of students started coming along to these nights and telling our own stories and whatever, and that was kind of my in with performance poetry. But I was like, oh my goodness, like, did anyone else know that this exists? I thought it was just like this little secret thing in Liverpool. And then like, that was it. Oh, I can't remember what the show was called now. It was Spoken Word All Stars, I think it was called. And there were people like Kate Tempest and Kat Francois, and they were touring around the UK, and I went to see them in Liverpool, and it was this whole bunch of performance poets, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is something that is wider than just Liverpool. It's wider than just these old men in the back of this pub. And that was how I then discovered, you know, performance poetry is kind of a national, international scene. And that was it. I just decided that's what I wanted to do. And I remember ringing my mum up and being like, I'm going to be a poet. And I ended up moving back to Leicester, where I was from, and I got a part-time job as a school librarian, which I did in the afternoons, and in the mornings I would go and do like free workshops in like anywhere that would have me, and then in the evenings I would just travel around doing open mics anywhere I could get to within like an hour or a couple of hours. And I did that for about a year, and then finally I started actually making a bit of a living from performing and doing workshops, and then eventually I gave up my job in the school library, and then it kind of went from there really. And then around 2015 I had my first book out with Burning Eye called Burning Books, and I turned that into a show, and yeah, it all kind of spiraled from there. And so far what was that? It was like 10 years ago that I started out, so far it's going all right.
Nice, good. Well, but it's like you said, it's a good illustration actually to lay it out like that, because it shows the kind of iterative process, right? Of, you figure out the thing, and it's very few people. I would go as far as to say no one I know that is full-time involved in poetry set out to be a full-time poet, because the idea of that is lunacy in itself.
Yeah.
But like it's that kind of stumble in, like you find people that, you know, stumble in from music or stumble in from theater, or, you know, just like that happened upon random nights. I do think it's interesting though, because I didn't know that it was that kind of like old man poetry. That kind of stumbled you in. And it's funny because while obviously that style doesn't apply to yourself, like the first thing I saw you do was Burning Books, and like you had obviously the Mischief Thieves with you, so it was immediately what I was into at the time, which was, you know, music and poetry collaboration. And like it had you know, it's very far from being old man poetry, but in there there was lots of stuff about being like, you know, there is that kind of working class, you know, political statement thing with it, that kind of storytelling, you know, where and that are, you know, it's analogous to other situations and stuff. It's interesting to actually see you can see those roots in Burning Books, right?
Yeah. It was funny. I mean, I must have stuck out like an absolute sore thumb at these poetry nights. I don't think they even called them poetry nights. It's just this bunch of old men and me just telling poems about like my boyfriends. And I guess, I don't know, I lived in Liverpool for 4 years, and it had such a, I guess, you know, like cities like Glasgow and Edinburgh, like it had such an identity and such a culture of storytelling, and yeah, I really think that I wouldn't have ended up in poetry or writing in the way that I do if it hadn't been for living in Liverpool for that time and going to those nights and hearing those stories, I guess.
Nice. So why did you do you think you decided to write something? Because obviously Burning Books is about education, and so you were saying you were working in a library and things like that. Was it just, you know, sort of being a student and in the time that kind of was the natural point you went to, or was it an aim to kind of make it so kind of outwardly political? It's
funny. Gosh, I was so into it at the time. It feels like a very long time ago now, but it was a mix of things. I grew up in a very strong Labour Party family. You know, I was taken out to deliver leaflets and knock on doors when I was like a few months old. Whole like local campaigns were run out of my mum's living room. So yeah, we were a very political family. So I had a really big interest in politics. I was so affected by the Tories getting in 2010 in that coalition, because you know what, it was a real mix of things. I had grown up kind of under the shadow of Thatcher. You know, it was post Thatcher. I grew up with my parents being like, the Tories can never get in again. They will ruin the country. So when they did get in, I kind of couldn't believe that it had happened because it felt like such an awful thing. But there was a tiny part of me that was like, I know this is awful, but it's also a little bit exciting because it was everything my mum said should never, ever happen. And now, I mean, God, I was like 21 and incredibly naive, and I fucking hate the Tories. But so there was this kind of undercurrent within me of being like, something massive has happened and it's everything my parents said could never happen for my entire childhood. So there was that. And then so I grew up in a family of teachers as well. My mum and my sister and my brother-in-law were all teachers, and then I was working in this school as a school librarian, and I worked with this woman. In fact, I wasn't the librarian. This woman who I worked with was the librarian, and my job was reading champion, which is not a real job. And
amazing on a CV
woman,
though.
Yeah. This woman that I worked with, she was the librarian, but she hated children and she hated books. And I witnessed her hitting the children, and she once took a load of books to the tip. It was shocking. It was like something from like 1975. I started writing these poems about her. I mean, she eventually got sacked because her behaviour was so shocking. But I started sort of writing these poems about her. I was absolutely terrified of her. And then I suppose I was also working in schools doing workshops at the same time, and I was sitting in a lot of staff rooms, and I was hearing, you know, staff talking about Gove and the education reforms, and it all kind of came together in this sort of show, which was kind of about this awful woman that I was working with, and then this kind of politics as well, and what the Tories were doing to education, and my kind of fury at the Tories, and my kind of political background. It all came together in this one show, which was Burning Books.
I was blown away by it when I saw it. I was very new to the scene. Like, I had only been kind of I did my first ever poem. I wrote and performed a poem August 2013, so it was during the Fringe, and so it was the next year, you know, I saw Burning Books, so that was kind of like my, you know, developmental year of seeing stuff, and I was blown away by it. Just like, especially it was the intensity of it, the sort of driving rhythm of it. You have a very like I don't know, I'm very bad at describing. I have very clear pictures of what I want. I'm just not a good skill for a poet. But like, you have a very like, because it sounds bad when you say it, but like a methodical kind of driving rhythm to a lot of what you do. There's a bit of the sort of ranting poet style about it. And I think it couples so well with music. How did you make the decision to kind of pair up with the Mischief Thieves and put that together as a, you know, a complete presentation?
So I think at the time I really liked a lot of stuff that Kate Tempest was doing, and Disraeli, and I liked what they were doing with music. And my boyfriend, now husband, is very musical and sort of played drums and guitar and lots of things. And we lived with a guy at the time who was in a couple of bands. And so we just started like in our living room putting some poems and music together and to see what it was like. And then we started doing it like every Sunday. And then it sort of became more and more, I don't know, formalized. And we really started to think about, you know, actually making a show and how we could use the music and poetry to create a narrative and put something together.
Nice. Do you like working with music? I know a lot of the poets, obviously, like with the specific show is kind of different, I guess, because it's, you know, you can practice that and it's more like a song where it's structured in. Do you like kind of random music? I know when you come and do our shows, we throw random guitarists at you and stuff. Is it a thing you like working with, or is it something you'd rather leave off?
No, I love working with music. I love working, like I've done your show and I've done Tung Fu before, and there's something, when it goes right, it can be absolutely magical, particularly when you're just working with music, which is just like, it's all improvised and you're just sort of working together. And when you get those moments where the music and the words just kind of cross at the right point, and it can just be, I love performing with music, but I also love watching that. I love watching musicians improvise to live performance poets, because when it goes well, it can just be, it can be beautiful. I mean, don't get me wrong, when it goes badly, it can be awful, but when it goes right, it's absolutely beautiful.
It's that thing, I think, especially from, you're someone that's done that show with music, and like, I mean, I would say anyway, you clearly have a good sense of timing and rhythm from the way you write. So it's like, it's easier for you to then go, I know which of my pieces will definitely not work with music. It's like you only run into it, I think, when it's often the poet makes a choice that is like a very inconsistent, rhythm to it or whatever. It's very choppy changey, which is what throws musicians wild. But I always like to just, I find it an interesting thing because music and poetry, I think, are so close together that it's interesting to see when they don't overlap more. Like I'm saying, when I saw your show in 2014, it was a thing that just kind of made sense. Was like, well, of course they're a band, like that makes total.
Yeah.
But that everyone else seemed to think it was very strange.
You're right, though. There is, you do have to be able to recognise when, some poems don't go with music, and that's fine. They don't need to. And I think it's kind of that interesting crossover, isn't it, about thinking about when things mainly work on the page, when things mainly work performed on their own, and when you can have music in. And I think it's being able to recognize that is really important and not trying to force it.
Well, I mean, it's a thing I've kind of repeated a lot on this show, and it's something that you probably have a really good understanding as someone who writes in various mediums, because you would look at parts of what you've done and go, that is a play. There are parts of what you've done that are individual poems, but you also, I know, write for TV and things like that. So you go there, it's picking the stories that fit the correct medium. So is it a book? Is it on the stage? Is it a full show? Is it what are you trying to say, and then figure out the best medium for it? So how is like your experience in poetry? How do you translate that? What was that taught you when it comes to writing for things like TV? Because obviously you have a creative writing background, so the skills are there. What does poetry inform on it, do you think?
Yeah, that is a really interesting question. You know what? It's really interesting thinking about kind of how thinking about the right medium for certain stories and messages. And what is really interesting is that I find it very difficult to be like, if I've had like a week writing TV scripts, is to suddenly go, I'm just going to do some poetry, because they're so different. And like at the moment, I'm making myself, I mean, one of the wonderful things about lockdown, and that is not a phrase you hear very often, is how accessible poetry workshops are at the moment. Everyone's doing poetry workshops online. So I've been going to like poetry workshops with people who normally I'd have to pay like 30 quid and go down to London. So I've had workshops with like Caroline Bird and Vanessa Kasule, and so that's been brilliant. And I'm making myself do at least like one weekly poetry workshop just to try and keep that up, because I think at the moment, there's no live scene, and doing virtual stuff can get a bit, as much as I'm glad that it exists, and I'm also doing a lot of virtual stuff as well, it's easy to get virtual fatigue. So I'm doing a lot of telly stuff, and I think it's really important to try and keep my foot in the poetry worlds as well. But in terms of actually answering the question that you asked me, how does writing poetry inform writing for television? I got asked this. I went for an interview to get onto the BBC Writers Academy, and they asked me about that. And I said that I felt in television, there's so much TV now, and there's like so many streaming services. People have just ultimate choice. And so if they don't like something, they can turn off within, 30 seconds. So you need to grab somebody within the first 30 seconds. And it's a little bit like doing a live gig. You have to grab your audience within the first 30 seconds. And it's kind of the same thing about what I was saying about try and make people laugh as soon as possible, so they know they can trust you and you sort of form a relationship with them. And I think that's one of the key things that I kind of take between the two is that you have to find a way to grab your audience as soon as possible, and you have to keep them listening and concentrating on you. And sometimes when you're the only person on stage, and no offense to all the white men out there, I'm sure they're lovely, but when you're doing a lineup and it's entirely white men and you are the only woman, you are even more on the back foot. Your audience are even less likely to trust you. And so you've got to work even harder to try and keep them listening to you. And I think it's a similar skill in television as well.
It's interesting because that sort of like immediate hook and stuff is when you work in writing, and I think it's one of the misconceptions, where people are looking for that, the steps you skip. The reason you can't is because you need to be able to make decisions and process things from a purposeful point of view, rather than, like we would all love to write every poem because it was a special thought that came fully formed and had to be expressed, right? But you're never going to make a living like that. And it's the same, like you look at like an industry like TV, where like you would never expect everyone to, write every episode of a TV show from a place of pure passion and catharsis.
Yeah. And
so you get into that thing of like, you need to learn specific skills, like how to hook people, how to structure a thing, like how to, like where to present it in the lineup, like what audience is it suitable for. Like it's easy to scream at TV programs and go, oh, that's dumbed down, that doesn't make sense, and you're like, yeah, but they're not writing for you. They're writing for the potential millions of people that will watch it. Like it needs to be, things that you will see inadequacies in are put in specific. And it's interesting when you look at like spoken word, because what you're saying there about the immediate hook, one of the big differences I often put between poetry and spoken word is that spoken word is in the instant and immediate, whereas poetry is supposed to be repeated and poured over, right? Like on the page, you can find new nuances, bury the meaning so that people have to dig for it. Whereas in spoken word, you need to understand what I've said by the time I finish saying it, because you might never see me again. So like, yeah, it's where you get into purposeful, writing choices.
Yeah, absolutely. And and I think that is the other thing that kind of performance poetry and writing for television, one of the similarities that they have is that, I get so annoyed with people, but one of the big criticisms that's thrown at performance poetry is like, it's not deep enough. I can't pore over this enough. I can't find the meaning in it. And there is a place for poetry that does that. I mean, 100% there is. But one of the big similarities between performance poetry and television is that, like, with television, you can't just write, no offense to this sort of stuff, but self-indulgent nonsense that people have to like wade through to understand what you're actually trying to say, because people will just switch off. So like it needs to have immediate impact. It needs to have an impact on people straight away. Otherwise they'll just turn over. And there is a skill to that. There is a reason that people at the top of their game in television are paid huge amounts of money, because there is a real skill to that. And so that is my new thing that I throw back at people when they tell me that performance poetry it's not deep enough. It's not as clever as the other stuff as page poetry.
I mean, yeah, like it's presented in a different manner. That's the whole thing, right? Like there's deep meaning in kids shows if you watch them, but they're presented in a, you wouldn't necessarily call them subtle or like great allegories for our society, but it's there. Like you can pour whatever you want into whatever piece. Like a piece of art only will give the meaning and context that you pour into it, but also the person that like looks at it. Like if you look at spoken word and expect it to just be like flashy words, then that's what you'll find. But like
yeah.
That's obviously not the point. Like, especially in a thing like spoken word that is so unfunded, often done, purely by people's own passion to do it. Like, it's crazy to think that it's just a bunch of people saying nothing. It's a very, frustrating viewpoint.
Absolutely. I mean, like in Carly's poem, she's got some like really beautiful lines in there. There's the line, and I'm not going to be able to repeat it word for word because I don't fully remember it now, but there's the line after, it's in between the bit where she talks about having to dress all in black as a poet, and the bit where she describes herself as looking like a carol singer all year round. There is a beautiful bit of writing in there where she describes how somebody who dresses all in black would look, and it's beautiful. It's a really crafted, really beautifully crafted line,
Yeah, I know
but
the
it
bit
is
you mean.
presented as a joke.
Exactly. It's what you do with the thing, right? It's like you can, yeah, it's where subtext and stuff comes in a way that is like specific, where I see more, more crossover between things like, short form TV and poetry. Because it's like, I often think of spoken word poetry as trying to say very complex things in their simplest and most beautiful form.
Yeah.
And like beautiful meaning, that can be funny, sad, whatever you want, but like in a entertaining way. And you go,
Yeah.
I think TV is often a similar thing. Whereas people look at the movie and go, how can I, draw that out over the runtime? Like a TV episode is such a tight, contained thing, especially like a sitcom or something like that. A tight 20-minute episode of TV has to tell a complete arc for multiple characters that all connect thematically, and have an A B plot or whatever it is, and like being able to fit everything you need to say into that structure. It's like when you pick a random form to write in poetry, right? It's like going, okay, I'm going to do a villanelle, and everything has to fit into it. I think there's a specific skill in that, rather than a undefined movie runtime that could be anywhere between 90 minutes and nowadays 3.5 hours. So it's like
No, absolutely. I've been doing this BBC Writers Academy course for the past year, and my mentor on that, John York, one of his stock phrases is like, it's the hardest thing in life to learn how to just be simple and like deliver a message simply. And I think that just goes for TV writing, but performance poetry as well. Delivering something that is simple and beautiful and well crafted in like a 3-minute slam poem, that is a real skill.
Yeah. I mean, there's slams I know where like first round, when I started, we was an insane thing when I think about it now. Like, because we run slams, we do all rounds are 3 minutes. But with the first few slams I entered, it was 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes were the 3 rounds. And you're like, I don't know if you've ever tried to write an impactful spoken word poem that is a minute long, but it's a nightmare. Yeah, but there's a good challenge in there.
But stuff like that forces you to be good though, because you've got to be good in a minute, and I do think that stuff like that it forces you to be good, and I like that sort of stuff.
It's things like I absolutely stole it for one of our rounds when we did the fantastical game show, which you were nice enough to come and humor us through.
Yeah. I love that.
Rounds,
me and Mark Grist came and did that. It's wonderful.
It was insane. We had a pug on stage. It was a great show.
Yes.
Ends with a dance routine. But the speed round is one of my favorite things about Find the Right Words. When I saw that there, I knew we had to put it in the game show, because I was like, that's such a immediate demonstrable skill to be like, I have produced good poetry in the specific time slot. It's like the guys that do poetry takeaway and stuff.
Yeah, it amazes me that people sign up to be speed poet every month, because it's not something that I would want to do. Yeah, they get 3 themes from the audience and have like an hour to go away and write a brand new poem and then perform it live on stage. It's madness. I don't know why people agree to it.
Bizarre, fools, masochists. So what are you working on now, Jess? What's the hope as, like, I know you specifically have just got into lockdown too. I'm a tier, I don't even know what tier I am. I'm just staying indoors. But hypothetically, saying things are getting better, right? What's the plan coming up? What have you got, kind of bubbling on?
So at the moment, poetry stuff, I have to say at the moment, is a little bit on the back burner. I do have a couple, I had a couple of show ideas that a bit kind of got blown into not being relevant by coronavirus. But so at the moment I'm writing an episode of EastEnders, and I'm writing an episode of Casualty. So I'm very much in the TV world at the moment.
Amazing. That's so cool. I saw, we were talking, before we put the cameras on, and I was saying how sort of bummed out I was when I saw that post. For those that didn't see it, Jess won the game of, oh, my thing got cancelled because of lockdown, because you had an episode of EastEnders ready to go, right?
Yeah. So I started this BBC Writers Academy last September, and you spend 10 weeks in the classroom in this very intense, hot house of learning about script writing, and you do that for 10 weeks, and then you have a little Christmas break, and then from January I started working on my episode of EastEnders, and it was all going really well, and it was like everything I trained for like 3 months, and then I got the phone call that was like, yeah, so I remember what it was. Things were shutting down all over the place, and we were kind of saying, yeah, but they won't stop EastEnders, will they? And someone said, no, there'd be like protests in the street if they stopped EastEnders.
It's an institution.
And then like heard on the news, like, yeah, they're stopping EastEnders. And then I got the phone call that was like, yeah, your episode's being cancelled. And it was so sad because, I felt like I'd worked for like 3 months to get to this point, and because we were in a position, I'm not going to use the word unprecedented, but we were in the position where no one knew what was going on and no one had experienced this before. We had no way of knowing whether things would pick up again. Would people not be able to go back onto TV sets for like a year, 2 years? So actually I didn't know whether that was it. That was, my screenwriting stints lasted 3 months. I didn't know whether that was going to be it for me, but luckily things have picked up again, and I've just had my episode of EastEnders signed off, and I'm now writing Casualty, so it's quite exciting.
That's so cool. That's it's those things as poets. It's like to translate to family members that have no concept of what I do. Like that's one of the things where I can be like, my buddy Jess just wrote an episode of EastEnders, and they'll go, "Oh, that's very impressive," because they don't give a shit about what slams you won, Jess. That's just how it goes.
It is funny whenever I say, "Oh, I'm writing this episode of EastEnders," people are like, "Oh, will there be poetry in it?" And I'm like, "No, there's absolutely no way they'd let me put poetry in it."
Oh, so sneaking a wee covert rhyming couplet. You know what I mean? Just Dr. Seuss it up. That's really cool, though. Well, I mean, good for you as well. Like having, I'm glad that avenue is there, the sort of TV thing, because it looks like that'll be, back up and running properly, certainly before live theatre, because it all makes sense. But I'm still hoping. I've got my fingers crossed that Fringe is back this year.
I'm crossing my fingers, crossing all my fingers that Fringe is back. Absolutely.
Yeah, because they left a big gap. In the sort of calendar this year, which was a pity, and it was lovely to see everyone and have them up, especially people like yourself who have been kind of consistent fixtures in my poetry calendar like every August. But I'm glad. Thank you so much for coming on for a chat. I know we're because I'm pushing the time limit, Jess, because I get carried away. I know we're gonna stick about and have another brief chat. I wanted to chat a bit about the Corbin show, which we didn't really get to get into properly, and your kind of experiences around there. Maybe that'll be the good subject for the Loudcast Extra. If you're interested in checking that out, guys, jump over to the Patreon. There'll be a link below, and you can see an extra sort of 10 minutes or so. It gets longer every time I do this, so who knows? Of me and Jess having a bit of a chat. Jess, I know you're going to do a poem for us before you go, but before we jump into that, where can people find you? Where there'll be links and stuff, but just let them know.
Best place to find me is probably Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and I am at Jess Green Poet.
Nice, got that handle. That's got to make sure you get that handle. Mark Galley's having a real mare of a time trying to figure out his social media at the minute, poor boy. But yeah, so go and check out Jess Green's stuff. Go and stay engaged, because you'll get to see her episodes of EastEnders and Casually. That's crazy. So yeah, go and check out all of Jessie's amazing stuff. Follow her on all the socials. Do you have a Patreon, Jess?
I do have a Patreon. It is patreon.com/Jess Green Poet.
I will put a link to that as well. You should go and support Jess on Patreon. It's a very nice thing to do, especially while all of our work has disappeared. So yeah, go and give her a hand. But Jess, you were going to do a poem for us before we head off, right?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Amazing,
I think I said earlier how much I don't like people writing about being poets or artists. So now, completely contradicting that, I'm going to do a poem called Ballad of the Unemployed Arts Graduate. My mum always thought I'd get a job with the Labour Party, write a novel in the evening. Except I was 21 and had just been to a Kate Tempest gig. So 2 weeks before graduation, I told her that I decided to become a poet. And it was all going to be very exciting. In my garret, cigarettes and notebooks. Think Nemo in Bleak House, but with more Leonard Cohen. I'd get a cat, have a string of lovers, beat back the literati from the front door just as soon as I was discovered by The Guardian. Age 30, I have a husband, a dog, and every so often I appear in the Leicester Mercury. The novelty of telling my partner's parents, friends that I'm a writer for a living has worn off, so now I just crumble into vague and babbling embarrassment. If I can't face it and will never see them again, I say that I'm an English teacher for fear that they'll ask, oh, have you written anything that we would have heard of? No, not unless you got a good memory for vintage YouTube videos. Even T.S. Eliot kept his job in the bank, didn't wander blindly with swaggering enthusiasm into the abyss. How I despise all of those quiet girls I went to school with, whose mothers always said they couldn't come swimming because they had too much homework to do, whose profile pictures now show them swimming in the Bahamas with 2 privately educated daughters they can afford to raise, not camping in a field with their parents, who they themselves were hoping that retirement would bring freedom from weekends away with their permanently broke and scruffy youngest. In response to the news of my future career path, my mum asked me why I felt more people didn't become full-time freelance performance poets. Because they're boring? Probably never thought about it. Maybe they just knew they'd be rubbish. Because, Mum, some of us are born to be accountants and some of us are born to be artists. This too was my response when, drinking in the student union, specky men would make fun of my Mickey Mouse degree. And they are now working in banking, oil, managing wind farms off the coast of France. I go around to my mum's house once a week to see what she's got going off in her fridge that I can eat. Who knew there was so much to pay for as an adult? That a pension wasn't something as far off as my own mortality. Lidl and Aldi have become the lifeblood of my existence. My optimistic savings accounts are long ago depleted and now only service my car at the tried and tested half-price garage. I pace the house searching for possessions I can sell on eBay, and still nobody wants a copy of Sliding Doors on VHS. But who needs disposable income when you've got 3 of a 5-act, self-aware yet deprecating one-woman show mapped out in your heads? Who needs a house, a mortgage, gas and electricity, a phone, the internet, a car and foreign holidays, a laptop, a telly, savings for when the boiler breaks, trainers, new clothes, insurance against all the things that can and do go wrong, the world's smallest but inexplicably most expensive dog, when you have so many feelings and the means to express them through the power of art and a bloody well-crafted poem. Thank you.
Nice. What a piece. Sorry, I laughed. I hadn't thought about the movie Sliding Doors maybe since it came out, and that was just like a wave of, you know, when you get like a flash of images where I'm like, I now know that full film again. That was bizarre. But yeah, lovely piece, Jess. That's so tremendous. So on the ball. Way too real. Yeah, no, that guy's just a glimpse of the awesome Jess Green there. So go and find loads more stuff. I know we've got videos of Jess up, and I know there's loads of stuff online, and so go and check it out. You've got books out with Burning Eye Books and all that good jazz. Like I said, I will put a bunch of links below. But for now, unless you're going to join us on the Loudcast Extra, we will see you next time. Jess, thank you so much for coming on. Say goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, we'd appreciate it if you could hit the like button, if you could hit the subscribe button, and make sure to ring that bell icon so you don't miss any updates from us in the future. If you want to go that extra mile and support us a little further, we do have a Patreon channel with loads of exclusive goodies, and you can sign up for as little as $1 a month. We appreciate your help, guys, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.